Today on Great Chat, we tackle a big topic: how to lead when the world is changing at an unprecedented rate. I'm Helen, and this week I'm joined by Ashley and Angela. Great Chat is brought to you by Mercury, radically different banking loved by over 300,000 entrepreneurs. We use Mercury to run this podcast and love recommending it to other founders and fund managers. It's free to get started. Try it for yourself. Visit mercury.com to learn more and apply online in minutes. Hello.
Hey guys. Hello, I'm in your city.
I know, we're all in San Francisco. We could have done a Great Chat live.
Well, I bet you're pretty envious of my pod setup. Like I'm in a tiny, tiny room because I'm an emerging manager on a budget, and there's no desk. So I like MacGyvered my setup, and I have an ironing board and a chair that I made them give me. And so if anyone's wondering why I look so pod ready, it's
Honestly, I'm impressed. I would not have thought of the ironing board. I would have tried to stack like 10 tissue boxes up. So.
Angela, you have podcasted like from sitting on the floor, like
you've podcasted from a boat. So
I did podcast from a boat, and I'm very good at this because I spent 2 years on the road during the pandemic. And so I have made closets my office. I have done the ironing board thing before. They're actually great because you can control how high they go. So pro tip to our listeners, it's a great makeshift desk. So
guys, I'm gonna manifest this because I just saw the CFO at SpaceX speak yesterday. But given that we podcasted on the road from boats, I think
Starlink sponsorship.
The only frontier left is from space via Starlink.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought you were.
Yeah.
I also
podcasting from
Starlink
space.
sponsorship.
Yeah. or that.
Both. You know what? I have the perfect special guest for that, Katy Perry. She could join us. Katy Perry, who is also very pro-Anthropic and now a paying Claude user.
Oh my gosh. Like in any other news cycle, yeah.
I love her chaotic energy. It's amazing. I've never been a fan of her music or anything, but now I'm just a Katy Perry fan for how will she insert herself. And I'm into it.
Well, Claude is back online, which is great. I definitely had a little bit of a freak out yesterday, but I remembered that I pay for Gemini Pro, and so I started using it, and I was like, holy crap, this is pretty good. So,
nice.
how sticky are these things, and how not a two-horse race is this whole, AI consumer battle? It's been interesting.
Claude was down because of all the Katy Perrys of the world, showing their support by signing up.
Or Pete Hegseth. I blamed Pete. I immediately blamed Pete.
Pete pulled the plug.
But all of the timing, it was so, eerily coincidental, right? Of this sort of the zeitgeist of the AI war and literal war the last couple of days.
Maybe Claude just needed a moment to lick its wounds. It's been busy.
Maybe.
It's had a lot of action. It's been preparing a lot of PR statements, and it just needed a long weekend.
I think everyone needs to pause. Usually Twitter is this great place where people come in with very fast hot takes, and just the rate of being totally wrong has never been higher. And maybe it's just accuracy by volume, and that's fine. But I do feel we're entering this era where truly nobody knows what's going to happen next, which is ironic because we have arguably more data than ever before at our fingertips too. But truly it's day to day. I didn't see this coming. Yeah, that's,
I mean, I think this is such a good example of how hard it is to land a take when things are moving so quickly, because just the sequence from, I guess, late last week, Friday, when Anthropic and the Pentagon were going head to head. And then there was that moment when Sam Altman spoke out in support of Anthropic, and everyone was reacting to that. He got so many kudos for that. And that actually gave permission for a lot of other people to speak out in support of Anthropic, including a lot of OpenAI employees and OpenAI investors. And so you had people who have large Twitter followings, and I won't call anyone out, who were, really sort of joining Anthropic's stand on these sort of hard lines around domestic surveillance and no human in the loop on autonomous weapons. And then like an hour later, or I don't know what the exact timeline is, like Sam announced that OpenAI had reached an agreement with the Pentagon, and like people are having to pivot and adjust, but with very imperfect information around how close that agreement was to what Anthropic was advocating for. And so like as a comms person, a former comms person, I was just like, oh my goodness, like how do you navigate something like this? And I think the answer is, unless you need to weigh in, you might be better off just taking a beat and taking a breath, because a lot of people are in uncomfortable positions now, having taken stands that now are awkward given their employment or given their affiliation. And then Sam Altman himself is having to try to wrap a better narrative around this moment. And I was actually even thinking about it. Like, I think he would have been in a better position had he not come out in support of Anthropic and then slid in there with the Pentagon deal. Because I think that whiplash of like people interpreting his stand as one thing and then having to recalibrate to a different reality is part of what has put OpenAI in such a challenging comm situation.
I don't really feel like people are like following as much as we are, though. So maybe the whiplash is sort of like, smoothed over by like the people just catch the what happened before and after and not in between. I mean, one thought that I had was like, as a marketer, right, which is different from comms, is like, who does this actually benefit in the long run? And watching Claude go to the number one position in the Apple App Store, right? And some people attributed it to the Super Bowl commercials, and I was like, okay. Or some people attribute it to like Katy Perry and like the sort of conversation and
ultimate AI.
I hope Katy Perry's equity in Anthropic. If not, someone get this woman some shares in Anthropic, please.
Yeah, exactly. She's got a little referral code.
Justin Trudeau 2026.
Exactly. So I think that in the end, who really wins? And one thought that I had was, I think like Anthropic or Claude sort of brand awareness was so low before, like just compared to, ChatGPT is basically the Kleenex of, tissue paper. I think if anything, just the collective events over the past, let's say month, maybe including the Super Bowl commercials and like, activism around like getting behind Anthropic, like all of this was frankly net positive for brand awareness for Anthropic and Claude. And we'll see how long that lasts, and we'll see if that matters in the long run. But I think like it's one of those, like, how do you just like zoom out and sort of see, who benefits from all of this?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm curious how much Anthropic cares about like prosumer users versus enterprise users. And like, I think they must care because they did the Super Bowl commercial and they've been like leaning in on some of their more like user facing positioning. But obviously in the worst case scenario, if they are indeed labeled a supply chain risk, this has like massive implications for their enterprise business beyond, and for their business period beyond the $200 million contract with the Department of War. I still can't say that. Department. I like every time in the Anthropic post where it's like, we want to support our war fighters. I'm like, wait, when did we agree on this new lingo? This is crazy. But anyways, meanwhile, so like, Anthropic, if it helps their consumer brand awareness, but hurts their like core business, which has been mostly, enterprise, like that's a tough trade-off. And then on the other side, OpenAI and Sam are trying to position this as like, we took on this contract at great personal cost to OpenAI, and we did it to repair the relationship between, American AI companies and the government. And I think they've said the contract that they signed is worth like low millions. And of course, there's been a lot of noise. I don't actually know what the volume is around sort of like delete ChatGPT. I certainly know a lot of people who have deleted their paying accounts. That might just be in the tech world, Helen, to your point, versus something broader. But like, I think it's very interesting if like OpenAI won in this enterprise contract, but lost in its sort of like consumer love, and the opposite for Anthropic, because, those are each sort of their core, like, OpenAI cares most about consumer and Anthropic cares most about enterprise. And so things are getting a little messy right here. But But we were talking in the group chat about everyone's drawing parallels between the like delete ChatGPT moment and the delete Uber moment. Yeah, Helen, I know you have some hot takes there.
Yeah, I think like that's been picking up steam and you know, credibly, because I think it was like Andrew Chen who probably got a lot of engagement on that post, and he was at Uber for a long time, right? So, and he was at Uber, I think specifically for delete Uber. I think this is just like a horrible analogy because I don't really feel like Lyft was like a real competitor to Uber for very long, maybe like for a minute, like literally a minute. And then I think they went very, very different paths. And even the delete Uber, in my opinion, again, not worked at either company, but I felt like there was like an opening where if Lyft like were so inclined, they could have gone for the jugular and been a real contender, but instead they sat on the sidelines. And I was just like, okay, well, that was their moment and they're never going to get it back. I think this is very different. I think that this is quite different. And Anthropic has, you know, a really strong business and like, you know, a ton of
understatement.
Yeah, a ton of traction on
the fastest growing company of all time.
Yes. This is not just like a winning the hearts of minds of consumers is going to be who wins at the end of the day. I think this is like much more interesting, frankly. Anyways, I don't love that analogy, but I get it. People are trying to paint like the analogy that the tweet that I shared in the group chat was like the Anthropic is Alyssa Liu and OpenAI is Eileen Gu, and I thought that was funny and honestly a better analogy than Uber Lyft.
Both are awesome. I'd be happy to be either Eileen Gu or Alyssa Liu.
Let's keep the Olympic meet going. Yeah,
I think it's different because I don't think it's a zero sum as ride sharing, right? Like I think the real thing with Lyft and Uber is it's very zero sum, and if you take a step back, I think maybe we're all techno optimists here, but I think we're probably just at the beginning of token usage and it's just going to be exponential. So it's not zero sum between Anthropic taking share of ChatGPT. I think both are just going to continue to grow and more Gemini, everyone it's a different competitive field.
Yeah, the takes are really bad. Like I saw another one where they did like Anthropic, OpenAI is Google, Yahoo. And I was like, awful take. God. Like they're just like, you know. So anyways, it truly maybe is like the accuracy by volume. People are just.
I also think like the Uber Lyft rivalry was like more of a narrative rivalry, and it was very superficial. Like Lyft was like the friendly brand because they had their like pink mustache, and like for a while you sat in front with the driver, whereas Uber was led by Travis, who was a total killer. And like, but those like the actual it didn't really impact the product very much. And so it was more just a like, how do you feel about these brands? Whereas I think this particular moment and really like Anthropic being one of the first tech companies to take a stand in this era where tech has mostly like, you know, bent the knee to a certain administration. Like this is not superficial. This is like, you know, whatever you believe about Anthropic's values, you know, and how they're interacting in this moment. Like this is about as real as it gets. So I also feel like the Uber and Lyft thing was like, it was a brand thing, and it was a brand thing that didn't go very deep. And then we're seeing some real ethical lines being drawn in this moment, and businesses willing to, you know, I think one of the interesting things that came out of this was like, apparently as part of onboarding at Anthropic, you are alerted that the company, if it ever has to make a decision that will be to the benefit of humanity, but take the value of the equity to zero, they will make that decision, you know. And I'm trying to imagine, like, I've never been part of any employee onboarding where like, we will kill the business for human, like some of the internal like dogma and mission of Anthropic is coming out in this moment. And we've actually seen that they're willing to act on it. So anyway, so this also feels like the opposite of that rivalry to me in this way.
This is a little bit of a pivot, but speaking of like Super Bowl ads and companies that did or didn't buy an ad, I listened. It's the MS Morgan Stanley Tech Conference this week, and there's like 3,500 like men in suits that have descended upon San Francisco. I don't know if you've encountered them, Ashley, but we're all congregated at the Palace Hotel, and it's a big conference. They had SpaceX yesterday. They have Dario from Anthropic speaking today. So I'm sure it'll be a full house to see what he has to say. They have Sarah from OpenAI, and then they've got Satya and like the whole tech slate. But I think the most interesting person I saw speak was Tarek from Kalshi, and he actually said that despite Kalshi not paying for a Super Bowl advertisement, they were the most searched consumer brand during the Super Bowl because everyone was trying to figure out how they could place like a view on what was happening on the game. And so they're like, yeah, like all those sucker brands that paid, $7 million for a 30-second spot, we end up being the most searched consumer brand. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. That
did he disclose whether people found Kalshi via Google?
I mean, I'm assuming that's where he got the search term.
I bet it was Google. I bet it was not, any of the AI chats. But anyways.
Yeah, never discount the consumer, though. They know where to search for things that they want. They won't be brainwashed by an advertisement.
Angela, I thought you were going to say people were searching for how they could make money from like the success of the Super Bowl ads, which just shows how warped my brain is.
Well, I mean, honestly, the conference is like, it's kind of like a little like removal from reality because everyone is so focused on tech and AI in the future. And the number of times the SpaceX CFO said multiplanetary species and preserving human consciousness, like, which really gave me like WeWork vibes of like elevating the world's consciousness, but there was kind of no reference to what was happening in the broader geopolitical landscape. And honestly, yesterday was just kind of weird. Like the markets didn't react at all. They were up despite like total
We were all
conflict
bracing for Monday morning, right? Like through the weekend.
Yeah. But I guess it's manifesting today.
It's
yeah.
Okay, I did not check that today. What's happening today? Today is Tuesday.
Markets are down.
Yeah.
Markets are down. Okay.
Of course, Angela.
I was like, everything's priced in. Everything's priced in.
But
to
what you guys just talked about like people having like takes too quickly, like everyone over the weekend, all the banks had these emergency calls where they're basically like, no, it's always a time to buy. It's going to be fine. Like it's not any different this time. And then it was like, oh, actually, like maybe it is different this time given the scale of what's happening. And then, everyone's adjusting their narrative accordingly. So yeah, the desire to have a hot take, like just take a beat, digest, and then see what happens.
Speaking of hot takes, I think one that we saw prove to be incorrect was, I think people interpreted the rise of Claude and specifically Claude Code. And, I think Claude Code went from like 0 to 2.5 billion revenue run rate in 8 months, if I'm remembering it correctly, as like taking share away from Cursor. And there was kind of this like Cursor is screwed narrative. And of course, now we're seeing rumors that Cursor has doubled its revenue run rate in the past, I don't know, like 3 months or something. I forget what the time frame is. Raising it, I've heard both 50 billion and 60 billion. And so it's also such a good reminder that we like, I think a lot of this is like so much of what we're going through is unprecedented right now. And we're trying to fit it into old frameworks so we can understand the world, right? Like we want to look at Anthropic and OpenAI through like an Uber and Lyft framework because that's comfortable. And we want to assume that like, oh, okay, like if Claude Code is taking off, like its competitor Cursor is probably screwed. And instead we're just in completely new territory. We're still in like very early innings and there's real product market fit for agentic coding. And so we're having to like adjust our mental models of the world and the narratives lag the actual news.
But I think it's also what Angela said about like, people not being able to identify zero-sum games and not, right? So I thought of this like Jeff Bezos quote, which is like one of my favorites, which was like when the data and the anecdotes, don't align, I've found that the anecdotes are usually correct. And I loved that because it was such like a check and balance in this like hyper data driven, world that we live in the Valley. And now I'm like going to revise that quote with like a little asterisk. It's like, unless all of your anecdotes are purely from Twitter. Cause like, I think it felt like a narrative violation when it was a Bloomberg that broke Cursor's AR. And I've said this about Cursor where like they're a proper noun, like Cursor for X, right? And like there's brand value in that I think Silicon Valley is also very poor at valuing, understanding how to value that. And so the staying power is actually quite strong. We were talking about how this moment right now feels a little bit like other moments we've had in our careers. The first one was in 2008, if you work through the great financial crisis. And I think that all of our takeaways were like, we were just too young to have the right context. This was like abnormal. We're like, okay, I guess this is what like work is. Seems pretty intense. And then there was that moment, very early pandemic where the market sort of panicked when businesses started closing and, kids weren't going to school, and it really felt like everything was shut down. And there was a big sell-off. I remember a lot of my Facebook friends like getting margin called and like really not anticipating that moment. And now it sort of feels similar. I think the last couple of weeks we've seen a lot of SaaS stocks, tumbling, and we're wondering, like, is this the start of something bigger? And, I think last week with the Block layoffs, Block laid off 40% of their staff, and the next day their stock really rallied. And so I think a lot of people have been saying this is the start of what is to come, a big wave. I think there are a lot of tech CEOs who looked at that and have been thinking about reductions in force, and maybe this, the Block sort of leading the pack will encourage them to do the same. So it's a moment where, nobody knows what's going to happen, but it's also like a moment where I think empathy goes a long way, because we don't know, how we're personally impacted, and we don't know how like our neighbors and our community is impacted. But I think the other point that we made was like sort of last couple of years, there's been a little bit of a hardening in tech, kind of like this backlash to empathy and, definitely inclusive programs and language and all of this. And we've seen a lot of our tech leaders, sort of take this hard stance, like very, very hard capitalist, lower empathy positions. And so kind of how are we even going to see our leaders navigate this moment is a question. And then how individually in your jobs, are we going to navigate this moment?
And I mean, add to all this too, it's like a very dramatic and scary geopolitical background, right? So and we keep seeing tech intersect with this. Obviously, the Anthropic, OpenAI, Pentagon stuff, right before the conflict with Iran. So there's just like a lot going on. Helen, as you were talking, I was like doing the math in my head, and I'm like, oh no, I can see the half-life. Like 2008 to 2020 is 12 years, 2020 to 2026 is 6 years. So like the next crazy moment is 3 years away, and then it'll be a year and a half, and then just going to be like every month, every week, every day, which is
if the EACC people or the accelerant
they want this.
They want everything. Yeah, they want this, right? So
everything's
maybe
happening
this is the new
very
norm.
quickly.
Yeah. I would say the other dimension I've been thinking about as we've been discussing this topic is, unlike the great financial crisis and unlike COVID, where I felt like it was very like equalizing in terms of like every sector was hit, like everyone was in it together in a certain way. I think that the effects of this moment in time are quite divided into like, there's the haves and the have-nots, right? Like if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a technical person, like this is an amazing time. You can find whatever job you want, and this is an amazing time to build, and everyone else is out there struggling. And so it's interesting to think about how we have empathy when the events that are happening are not equalizing across the board, but creating really a divide in society across people that are benefiting very substantially and people that are trying to find their way.
And also at the same time, the prior two events felt like it was like happening to us. I mean, granted, there were architects of the financial crisis, and who knows how the COVID pandemic started. But for most of it, we were reacting the best we could in real time. Whereas like tech is the architect of this moment. If we're talking about, the labor disruption that AI is going to bring. And Angela, I both agree with you. And also like tech is the first to really feel the impacts of AI, because I think as we're seeing with companies like Block, we're moving faster into this future than other companies and sort of like better positioned to see the writing on the wall. Now, I do have questions around like the convenience of the AI narrative in terms of being able to do what needs to be done. If your workforce is, bloated, or I read two different accounts of Block's growth during the pandemic. One was that they had 4x their company size over the course of the pandemic. The other was that they had hired 4,000 people. Those numbers are a little bit different, but essentially they let go the same number of people at least that they hired over that time. And so there's also a question of like, has this just become more palatable because AI is a useful narrative, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but Jack Dorsey knows how to take advantage of this moment to be able to do what he believes is necessary to sort of like right size his company. And we saw this playbook before with Elon coming into Twitter, when he like slashed the workforce really early on. And it felt like it gave a lot of other CEOs in the tech industry permission to do the same. And Helen, to your point, that in many ways was like the beginning of the hardening of tech leaders who had been like very empathetic during COVID and, you know, sort of trying to help their teams adjust to all this change and trying to participate in sort of broader social conversations. And then the pendulum swung way to the other side where, you know, it became okay to just be like a hard charging capitalist and just do what needed to be done. And so kind of fascinating to see like sort of echoes of that in the Block layoffs.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I shared with you guys, but I thought about this moment that I had in 2008 several times over the past week, which was like, you know, June 2008, everything was collapsing and I was like 24 and I worked in advertising and, you know, we had a couple hundred people at our agency and we let go like 75% of staff, most of which were, you know, young. And so all of my friends and peers and I was left standing because I happened to work on like one of the accounts that weren't affected. And so as the president was leaving that day, he saw me at my desk. We just came over and just like checked, you know, how are you doing? You know, he made this comment, which made no sense to me at the time, but I can't stop thinking about it, which was, Helen, sometimes you have to take moments like these to right size the ship. And then I think I like literally burst into tears because I like, one, didn't understand what that meant, but like two, like all my friends just lost their jobs. Right. And so, and I thought about that because I think that for a lot of, you know, tech leaders who, and you know, maybe just leaders in general, they're thinking about how to increase margin. They're thinking about how to stay competitive and nimble in an increasingly competitive environment. And, you know, a lot of that is, well, is AI going to help me do more with less, right? Like people are the biggest line item when you look at, you know, anybody's like OpEx. And so this is sort of, you know, I wonder how many leaders are thinking about like, even if their margins are healthy, even if they're fine, like, are they going to use AI as this sort of like scapegoat or, you know, something where they're going to like right size the ship in this moment? And I think the answer is yes. We don't know exactly where or who or whatever, but I definitely think that that's happening.
I also wouldn't be surprised. I mean, again, we like zero-sum frameworks to think about things, but one thing that I've been hearing from friends who are sort of like deep in the enterprise AI transformation world is it's not just that you need less people, it's you need people with different skill sets. And so I would not be remotely surprised if like Block is hiring, you know, meaningfully on the other side of this layoff. And it's just that the types of people that it had in place are not as relevant for sort of the path forward. And that's always a hard thing to navigate. And it's a little bit too nuanced of a message. And I thought Jack Dorsey's comms was actually like quite
I thought it was fantastic. Yeah, I thought it was deeply empathetic and not of the hardening tech leader that I think we just spoke of.
It reminded me a little bit, speaking of these like sort of black swan moments that we've had the pleasure of living through, of Brian Chesky's iconic post about the layoffs at Airbnb early in the pandemic. And that was, I mean, talk about like empathetic leadership. That was heralded, like he was applauded and cheered for the way that he did that and, you know, the way he positioned it. And I think the thing that helped him there was the broader context was so obvious, right? Everything was shutting down. Airbnb like is a travel and hospitality company. And it was like, this is a survival moment. And then actually, like Jack, the sort of terms for departing employees were incredibly generous. And so there was like a lot of care. It wasn't just the message, it was also the substance of how they were parting ways. And so there are sort of these iconic communications that define some of these moments.
Of the times, you know, I also think of like a completely opposite example, which really underscores like how important context is. Right. Yeah. So like
I know where you're going.
Brian Armstrong's, you know, Coinbase is a mission-driven company. That really didn't land at the time, right? And I think, I mean, some people thought it was great and heralded it, but like, I think that would be just like an average CEO statement today. But at the time, I think with the environment and context, right, it felt so cold. And for me, I had a little bit of disconnect because I knew a ton of Coinbase employees and the way that they spoke of Brian and sort of like the programs that were inside Coinbase and like, I mean, in today's terms, I would call Coinbase like a pretty woke company at the time. So like, there was context that was missing. I know.
Pendulum swings.
Exactly. But like another reminder that you don't really know on the outside, like what a company looks like on the inside as well. But I think that's just another example of like, well, the context matters. So sometimes it's not even like who's delivering the message, what's the substance of the message, but it's like, what is the vibe?
Yeah.
And right now, it's really hard to tell exactly what the vibe is. I think that we are all, living in our own little universes. So to even be a comms professional and like understand exactly how to read the room or which room to read and sort of give the inputs for, what the right messaging would be is probably more complex than ever.
Yeah, it's funny. I went back and reread the Brian Armstrong post. And it was funny because it's like very tame by today's standards. I would say like Alexander Wang's like MEI, like merit, excellence, intelligence was like a much harder version of that, but also in a very different context where it landed for a lot of people. It's funny. If I had abundant time, which I don't yet, I guess I haven't, set up my OpenClaw accordingly. I would try to rewrite that post because there were lots of good ideas in there. And he also wrote a follow-up post to clarify some things. And I think if Brian had led with like what being mission-driven means for how Coinbase is going to show up in the world and where it's going to take stands, it would have been way more powerful because he had to admit in the follow-up post, Coinbase is inherently political because the regulatory environment for crypto is like critical. Right. It's existential for the company's success. And, we've seen Coinbase donate to like I think they threw in $1 million to Trump inauguration. Like, this is a political company, but it's if he had talked about where they're going to take stands through the lens of, like economic freedom and this broader and sort of the importance of focusing and not spreading yourself too thin, I think that would have worked better. Whereas like he sort of started off with like, this is why we're not showing up in this moment. And the subtext was, this was such a moment where we were having conversations around racial equity. And I think it just felt very like personal and anti versus, hey, like here is how we think about how we show up in the world. So it's interesting and actually reminded me a little bit of, he starts the post talking about like winning through the lens of winning, which did not set the right sort of tone for the moment. And I think we're in this like with the OpenAI comms, and let's see if I can make this bridge. Like, I think things are shifting, where the vibes are shifting right now because the lens of like just we've been in this mode of all that matters is winning and all that matters is growth and all that matters is like, you get the bigger valuation. And I think what Sam and OpenAI ran into was like the victory of swooping in and nabbing that contract actually was not the stamp or the not to say that they were doing it through a lens of winning, but it was not celebrated in the way that maybe we've had a sort of more black and white view of the world lately in tech. And the conversation that Anthropic started by taking a stand brought more nuance in. And so, Helen, to your point, like reading the room is so hard right now. And it's especially hard because, of course, if you're only going off of what's being said on Twitter, you're getting a very vocal minority. Very hard to know what sort of the broader group of people are thinking, including your own employees from that sample set. And so I have a lot of empathy for leaders and comms people trying to navigate this moment.
I think that people are resilient and they adapt quickly, and we would not be surviving as a species if we didn't have many, runs at this. And so I think from a comms standpoint, comms is going to evolve, and there's going to have to be like instead of what is the audience feeling right now? Who is the audience? It's like maybe there is nuanced messaging. Maybe there is, 17 versions of the single message, and, maybe there's more advanced A/B testing. But like something that I think that in this sort of, thought about empathy and jobs that's been on my mind is like people keep saying, what are parents doing right now? What are people who have kids doing right now? We thought, you send your kids to a great school. If they're STEM inclined, you encourage that. They're going to graduate to some very high paying, white collar job. And then, you've done your job as a parent. And now like we're watching a lot of these very roles disappear. And so, what our kids are already on that conveyor belt. What do we do? And I'm like, I think we're like smarter and more resilient than this. And I think that it will become obvious, soon, maybe not exactly in this moment, what skills are most valuable in this AI era. And I think that you'll find the equivalent of Kumon, but for like honing those skills, right? So I'm excited to see what it is and what surfaces from this moment. And I think I'm much more like, no, we will just adapt as humans have always adapted, not like, oh no, this very fixed way that we have been thinking about, how the world works is no longer true and I'm doomed. And so I think that there's like, I've been sort of like playing around with this, like, sort of what does this mean for parents of young kids or school-aged kids?
I mean, I think about that too. And I think what the conversation you and Ashley were having, Helen, reminded me of is something we've talked about on the pod before around just the social contract that companies have with employees. And as you put that together with the idea that there's this divide, I think it's never been clear that there are certain skills, Ashley, as you were saying, or roles within a company that are highly valued. Like, remember that whole frenzy over the summer of people getting traded for like billions of dollars? It's sort of like the people that matter and then like everybody else. And I think when you talk to younger folks at some of these companies, they just don't understand what the social contract with the company is because they feel like they're working and they have no path to progression because their skills just aren't as important. And so therefore, like, what should their loyalty to the company be, or what should their work ethic be, and like what should they be optimizing for? And so it is quite nuanced, and it's just interesting because I think we are living through this evolution of two different sets of social contracts for employees, the ones that stand to gain a ton and care a lot, and maybe like everybody else. And I think that's pretty unprecedented.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess, I mean, Helen, I share your optimism, but I also think we are so lucky, all of us, to have the viewpoint we do. I mean, I think investing in tech is like, you have to be you're a default optimist.
Yeah, that's right.
Change is good. Right. Change is exciting. And I think what I worry about, and this is a theme we've been talking about lately, and maybe will even be something we tackle on a future podcast, is I just think the message for a broader audience, a more mainstream audience right now, there is nothing that is optimistic or good. I think the headlines coming out of tech are either, all white collar jobs are going to be eliminated, or we're building a data center in your backyard, or, teens are committing suicide after using these AI bots. And so I think if we want to bring the rest of the world along with us, like, we need better stories about the future, and we need to start teasing out like why this could be great for people and humanity, because there's a lot of like, we have the benefit of both like, seeing through the lens of the companies that we're backing and working with, but also I think there is like a techno optimist current that runs through pretty much everyone in this industry, and that is very unique to us. So I'm optimistic, but I also think we need to do the work of helping other people see the glimmer of like, why are things going to be better on the other side? And no one's really taking that on right now. Like, none of the leaders of these big companies are taking it on. Certainly our government is not taking it on. And so someone is going to have to step up and start, have a more inclusive narrative for what this next sort of like era of humanity could look like.
If the marketing industry can make people eat kale, I have strong conviction that they will draw out this glimmer of hope.
Angela, I love kale. What are you talking
kale?
about?
Yeah, I love kale.
Angela, I did not take you for an anti-kale person.
No, I just mean pre-marketing. I think the largest purchaser of kale was Pizza Hut. Like for like garnishes on their salad bar, and then kale became a thing. It's great. We're making everyone.
All right, we're gonna get the kale lobbyists.
Yes, on AI. Yes, get them on. Kale and Katy Perry, the unbeatable
perfect
combo.
Ending. That is where we should end every podcast. The intersection of kale and Katy Perry.
LA. Anyways, okay.
Erewhon.
I wasn't expecting a geographic location, but yes.
All right. See you next week.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you next week. you.